So my name is Kaye Wise Whitehead, K-A-Y-E, Wise, W-I-S-E, Whitehead, which is as it sounds, Whitehead. And I am a professor of communication and African American studies at Loyola University Maryland. I'm also the founding director of the Karson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice. And everyone calls me Dr. K because I'm the host of Today with Dr. K on WEAA right here in Baltimore City.
Thank you so much, Dr. K. I'm going to send it over for Meg for some questions.
So I think I mentioned in our email to you originally, but one of the women that we're focusing on is Anna Arnold Hedgeman. Can you explain can you provide us with some background about her life and why she was an important figure in the civil rights movement?
I came from the work of Anna Arnold Hedgeman when I was in college. I followed the work of Dr. Dorothy Ahite, who is the past president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And Anna Arnold Hedgeman was a friend of Dr. Dorothy Ahite's. They worked together. And so when I began to study what Anna Hedgeman had done and the work that she had served our community by working under President Harry Truman and the work she did in New York in particular around fair employment practices, and the fact that she was the first Black woman to serve in that type of position in New York. And so her work with that is one reason why we celebrate her in Black Women's History Week, which is that unique time of the year when the end of Black History Month overlaps with the beginning of Women's History Week, History Month, and we celebrate what Black women have done. Anna Hedgeman, in particular, was one of the organizers of the 1963 March on Washington, and we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of that march. People don't really talk about the way in which Black women were uniquely involved in the organizing of the march, because you think about the Big Six and all the Black men who were in front, who met with John F. Kennedy, even though Dr. Dorothy Ahite was there in the room when they met with JFK. But in terms of who actually did the organizing, who put the work together, Anna Hedgeman was one of the people helping to put the work together so that the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom would be successful. It was in 1954 that she held the mayoral cabinet position in New York. And the fact that she was the first African-American woman to do so meant that she was opening up doors. She was breaking down barriers. And she set the pace for what would eventually become a way of dealing with Black folks when it comes to employment, when it comes to housing, that has been replicated and repeated several times over in different states around the country.
And I know you mentioned the March on Washington just now, which was the basis for my next question. So that's a great segue. Can you talk about her contributions in planning the march and other women who helped to plan the march who might not have been recognized over the years or whose contributions have been kind of erased from the history books?
The March on Washington, which was the brainchild, I would argue, of A. Philip Randolph from the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Like, he had tried many times before the March on Washington to pull together a unique opportunity for Black folks, both in positions of power, some of the nameless, faceless foot soldiers, to meet in Washington, D.C., to take their demands to the capital city and to inform people exactly what it is that we want. That the march wasn't just about breaking down the barriers of Jim Crow, although that is important, but it's specifically asking for jobs. And that this notion of freedom, of course, began to be understood in a number of different ways. Anna Hedgeman worked specifically with A. Philip Randolph and with Bayard Rustin, who also isn't talked about very much in terms of the planning that he did to help the march. When you talk about women who were involved in the march and you put Anna Hedgeman on the table, you also put Dr. Dorothy Ahite from the National Council of Negro Women. And the fact that she headed up one of the largest organizations for women at that time, for Black women. And they were involved in sending out letters to people, making phone calls, helping with the local organizing on the ground. She had, and that time when she worked with Dr. Dorothy Ahite, they laid the groundwork for what they eventually did in 1966 when she helped to co-found the National Organization for Women. So her work in organizing with the march, her work in working under Harry Truman, and her work in kind of befriending Dorothy Ahite and working alongside her led to her making a larger contribution really for women, for Women's History Month, which is co-founding the National Organization for Women now.
And kind of a bigger picture or broader question, who are some other women from the civil rights movement whose voices have either been muted or erased throughout history, whether that's tied to the March on Washington or just the movement as a whole?
So unfortunately, when we talk about Black history, there's a certain narrative that gets painted about who has done the work, that this collapse of the Black history narrative that happens because Black History Month is only 1 month. And for some people around the country, that means they only talk about and only teach about Black history from February 1st to February 28th or 29th, depending upon whether it's leap year. And I think that's the wrong narrative. And what it does is it limits the teaching of the American history story, and it just assumes that Black history is separated from American history, and it's not. Black history is American history. But when that's within that smaller framework of 28 days, well, there are only certain people whose stories get told. That everybody talks about Frederick Douglass, or they talk now about Barack Obama, or they talk about Thurgood Marshall gets included, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and when they include women, it's Harriet Tubman, it's Rosa Parks, it's Sojourner Truth. And they pretty much stop there. Like if they're really broadening the story, they may bring in the work of Coretta Scott King, but mostly do it in relationship to her husband, rather than talk about the work that Coretta Scott King did once Dr. King was assassinated and the way she became a leader of the movements, the way she spoke up for LGBTQ issues, the way she worked on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign, that she kept the movement going forward outside of just being the wife, and at this time the widow of Martin Luther King Jr. She was an activist in her own right. So I think about the work of Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. At the time when she was in law school, she was the only woman attending Howard Law School. And there was a great discussion taking place in the classroom about how do they fight and end Plessy v. Ferguson. This is during a time when they were kind of laying the groundwork leading up to Brown v. Board of Education. And the idea was that they needed to attack Plessy by focusing on the equal part of separate but equal. And they said, if we just attack the word equal in the separate but equal notion, then we can end legalized segregation. Pauli Murray was the only person that said, look, instead of focusing on equal, focus on the word separate. Like we actually have to stake our cases on dismantling this notion that separate leads to equality. That is the word, that is the focus that we have to have. And they took her advice. And that's actually how they dismantled legalized segregation. That became the foundation of Brown v. Board. She wrote a book, and her book, Thurgood Marshall called her book the Bible of ending legalized segregation, the Bible of Brown v. Board of Education. It was states' laws on race and color, which really laid out how they were able to effectively dismantle legalized segregation by going after separate and separate but equal. So I think that's a voice that is not talked about very much. And we really can look at her work, which became the foundation for how we were approaching attacking legalized segregation, attacking white supremacy, attacking racism through the courtroom. And so I want to lift her up. I also want to talk about Mamie Till Mobley. I know that we have spent some time getting into the work of Mamie Till because of the movie that came out, Till, that focused on the work that she was doing. But it wasn't just that her son was killed and she challenged the United States government in the ways in which Black children were being mistreated and the bodies of Black children were being mishandled, but it's the way she became an activist. We can probably add to the Mamie Till Mobley collection a number of Black mothers who lost their children in this system, who became an activist as a pathway to getting healing and to actively challenging the system. I think about a number of the women coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement, what they call the moms of Black Lives Matter. But I think laying the groundwork for that was Mamie Till Mobley, with saying that we're going to challenge this system, that I'm going to use my feelings to push this country towards doing something different. I put down on the table for consideration Claudette Colvin. Claudette Colvin, who as a teenager was really the first person who refused to give up her seat on the bus. I mean, she was supposed to be the face of the Montgomery bus boycott. They were going to build a movement around Claudette Colvin. Word got out to the NAACP leaders that they were told that Claudette Colvin was unmarried and that she was pregnant as a 15-year-old teenager. And there was this pushback that we cannot have the face of the movement be an unwed, pregnant Black teenage girl. And so she was pushed to the side, and her voice was silenced by our own community. She became a major activist. And the work that she did in Montgomery cannot be discounted. It started when she was 15. It continued with her work with the NAACP. It continued when she joined 3 other women as the plaintiffs in the Broader v. Gale case. That's the case that ultimately overturned bus segregation in Alabama. So at 15, 16 years old is when she started. They tried to silence her, but she pushed back. I want to add, as another woman who is not talked about very much, another Black woman, is Maud Ballou. Maud Ballou, she said she received a phone call from a friend of her husband, from this young hotshot minister and activist who wanted her to be his secretary. And that young hotshot minister and activist, of course, was Dr. King. And he asked her to be his personal secretary. And she worked with him from 1955 until 1960. So she helped him through the Montgomery bus boycott, the publication of his first book, which was Stride Towards Freedom. She helped him with the prayer pilgrimage for peace that happened in Washington, D.C. But as a result of her being the personal secretary for Dr. King, she was number 21 on the Montgomery Improvement Association's list of Black folks and organizations that were in danger. Her children were threatened, her house was bombed, but her work with him in terms of organizing his papers, organizing his schedule, speaking up and speaking alongside of him does not get any credit. People don't know the name Maud Ballou. I'd also like to add, I guess, Diane Nash, who is still alive. Diane Nash was a freedom rider. She was a nonviolent student activist for desegregation. She helped students get organized through SNCC to think about what it means to fight against the system and use nonviolence as a strategy. She helped the Congress for Racial Equality, CORE. She helped them in terms of organizing, but she was a major figurehead and a voice, and she still raises her voice today when she talks about racial injustice and when she talks about equality.
Mauricio, do you have any other questions? I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, my main question is like, and especially after hearing so many fascinating stories that have been silenced over time, why do you think, basically on recent times, is there more interest, and I will say awareness is the more proper word, to bring this women's history to light and to get their history and their story known?
I think the work that has been done to bring Black women's history and to bring their voices into the canon is the work that is being done by Black women who are interested in and who are committed to making sure that our sisters' experiences, their legacies, are no longer forgotten. They're no longer looked over. I know I committed myself as a young historian to being clear about collecting the voices of Black women from the 19th century and adding them back to the canon. I think we're all being pushed by the work of Alice Walker, who, when she went and reclaimed the legacy of Zora Neale Hurston, said that we had to go and reclaim the voices of Black women, if necessary, bone by bone, and make sure they're added back into the canon, make sure that they are not forgotten, make sure that they're amplified. And so Black women are doing that. I mean, along with other communities, but I'm specifically focusing on the work that Black women historians, Black women who work in intersectionality, Black women who work in gender studies are making sure that the contributions of the Black women who've come before us, the Black women who opened up the doors for us, the Black women who in some cases gave their lives or their livelihood. I mean, Rosa Parks gets remembered for not giving up her seat on the bus, but no one talks about her work as a secretary for the NAACP in Montgomery. No one talks about after she refused to give up her seat after the Montgomery bus boycott, that she had to leave Montgomery because she was fired and her husband was fired and they could not get any work. They could not sustain themselves. And there was a cost there was a price that she paid to be the face of the movement. And that is part of adding the collective narratives to the greater story.
I know that this might be a little bit of a loaded question, but you just told us the story about this 15-year-old girl who wasn't able to be the face of the movement because she was a 15-year-old unmarried girl, pregnant girl. What do you think were the reasons behind the history silencing these women and their work and their fundamental work in this moment in history?
We live in a misogynistic culture, a culture that is based upon upholding and uplifting the patriarchy. So women have always had to fight to be heard. I'm specifically just focusing on Black women, but women as a whole have been fighting for space. We know that we live in a society where women are underpaid. I mean, there is clearly a wage pay gap that I think we all recognize, and it impacts women of color more than white women. And it takes Black women until August of the next year to catch up to the money that our white male counterparts make in a year. I mean, it takes, Hispanic women until October and Indigenous women until November. So we know that there is a clear wage pay gap. We also understand that we live in a society where women are not taken as seriously as men are taken. That we are still fighting to break down barriers because of misogyny, because of sexism, because white supremacy is rooted in the patriarchy. So the realities of America, those are part of the reasons why we have to do the work. That's part of the reasons why we have to do the heavy lifting. It's part of the reason that so many of us have committed to living our lives as Black feminists, if you're a Black woman or a feminist in general, that we're saying we are going to center the voices and the lives and the experiences of Black women. We're going to focus on closing this wage pay gap. We're going to focus on the health disparities that are existing in this country. We're going to focus on what is happening within our communities. We're going to focus on supporting Black women and finding spaces to open up the room so they can be included. Like, this is part of a life decision. It's part of a do or die situation, but it's because the system is set up the way it is. We are not going to, clearly not in my lifetime, we're not going to dismantle capitalism, white supremacy, or the patriarchy. Like, that's not going to happen, because as quickly as we're taking bricks off, you have another portion of society putting them back on, and sometimes they're putting two up for every one that you take down. So instead, we have to find a way to uplift of the Black women who are doing the work, and we have to find a way to include their stories as part of the greater American historical narrative. So I guess I would like to just kind of go back for a second to what I was mentioning earlier about Anna Hedgeman, because I think that if I really want to talk just a little bit, if I may, I want to go back to the fact that when she was really active. So one of the people that we find that when we talk about Black women who contributed to the civil rights movement, there are certain names that we weave into the story. We talk about Coretta Scott King, of course, who was then, of course, married to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We talk about Dr. Dorothy Ahite, the head of the National Council of Negro Women. We talk about Mamie Till Mobley, who was also invited to be a part of the Black Women's Collective, who was showing up. We talk about Myrlie Evers, the widow at that time of Medgar Evers, who had been shot and killed earlier that year in 1963 in his driveway. And this was only in August of 1963. But the voice I want to add to the table is the voice of Anna Arnold Hedgeman. She was a civil rights leader. She was a politician. She was an educator. She was a writer. She was older than the women that I'm talking about, because she had served under President Harry Truman as the executive director for the National Council for Permanent Fair Employment Practices Commission, because she had worked on President Truman's presidential campaign. She had been appointed to the cabinet by the New York City Mayor, Robert Wagner, when she became the first Black woman to hold a cabinet position, a cabinet post in New York City. I mean, she was an advocate for people of color. She was an advocate for people who were economically challenged in New York. But she was also one of the organizers of the 1963 March on Washington. She is the behind the scenes voice that doesn't get included. She was a close friend of Dr. Dorothy I. Hyde, and Dr. Dorothy I. Hyde was part of what I call the Big Seven, not the Big Six. We talked about the Big Six for the March on Washington, which includes all Black men who were the heads of organizations, the largest organizations at that time, from Dr. King to John Lewis. But Dr. Dorothy I. Hyde made it seven because the National Council of Negro Women was a very large organization. But she was friends with Anna Hedgeman, and she had been involved. Anna Hedgeman's work in her life was during the 30s and 40s that she was really pushing the envelope when it came to civil rights and fair employment practices. What she did by the time you got to 1966, she was one of the co-founders of the National Organization of Women. So she made major contributions, not just to the struggle for civil rights for Black folks, but also to the struggle for equal rights for women.
Well, thank you so much. We'll let you know if we have any follow-up questions. I believe the story should make it pretty soon, as we're starting Women's History Month, and we really appreciate your wisdom and your words to enrich the story. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If there's anything else you need, let me know.